This week's materials were very interesting and thought-provoking for me. I was able to look at my classmates' responses after and see their different opinions and perspectives on the material and open my mind up to new questions and new ideas that I wasn't able to look at before. So the first piece of material that really stood out to me from the first set of materials was misrepresentation. So this documentary made me very emotional and angry as I watched it. I saw how male news anchors and different men in the media spoke about women in the montages that were included in the documentary, and many of my female classmates drew personal connections from watching misrepresentation and from the ways in which media has always impacted women and their self-worth because of what is depicted about us on TV and in movies. And it upsets me that that still is something going on today, and if our future generation is going to have to deal with this as well. Ari brought up the phrase toxic masculinity in her response, and I think this is an idea that needs to be discussed as well when it comes to the portrayals in media, because men are so often portrayed as the tough male, and something that reminds me of this toxic masculinity is the newer, I think it was Gillette, the commercial, where they fought toxic masculinity and the backlash that Gillette received from all of the men and women who are like, oh, they just need to toughen up. This isn't an accurate portrayal of how men feel, like, just toughen up. And toxic masculinity needs to change as well. We need to be able to represent men and women in different ways without there being stereotypes or there being rude comments made about them because of their gender or because of the way they're acting. So I was looking at my classmates' responses, and I was intrigued by the question Jessica posed in her first response. She had asked, by creating misrepresentation, did anything change from it? How do we make this observed fact become a reality? And how do we put action into our words and get the media to stop talking about women in a derogatory way or causing them to think about themselves a certain way? So one way that I think we can put our words into action is by enlightening both the new and the past generation, because I think it's important to educate everyone on what the media can do to females and their self-worth. My classmates, both Jessica and Maisie, recommended misrepresentation for different groups than I recommended it for. So they recommended it for a younger generation, and so I instead recommended it for males of all ages, because I believe we need to start with the sex that perpetrates this problem onto women. As it was said in misrepresentation, most of the executives in the media and advertising that get to decide how women are perceived in the media are men. They get to decide what is shown about women. Because of this, I believe males of all ages should watch this documentary to change their perspectives on how their wives, sisters, daughters, and friends, etc. are represented in the media, and how what they decide women are shown as on TV and in movies affects people in their lives just as much as it affects people not in their lives. So one thing about misrepresentation that I critiqued was the lack of discussion on how the media portrays people of color and LGBTQIA plus women. So Olivia brought up her course that she took with Dr. Jones on discrimination against marginalized groups, and I think it's equally important to look at people of color and LGBTQIA plus representations, because they experience intersectionality of being marginalized for their sex and their race, sexuality, or other ways of self-identification that straight cis white white women don't experience in the same way. And I think misrepresentation kind of missed that fact. I mean, it was filmed a while ago already, a couple years ago, but I think it's important for us to really understand what women of color and LGBTQIA plus women experience as well, and I think they need to be discussed more. So, while misrepresentation really stood out to me from material set 1, Real Injun really stood out for me from material set 2. And I was taken back to when I was 16 and was lucky enough to stay on the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota and interact with the Lakota people. While I was there, they had a group of us build a teepee for one of the families in their yard. And at the time, I thought we were building it because of the stereotype that Native people all lived in teepees. But I never really put it together that we were doing this because the Lakota people are Plains Indians. They are the community that is most represented in, well, not really represented, they're most depicted in the media. Their culture is the Native culture that is so often depicted in Hollywood, and now I can see, or now I'm wondering why it's the Plains Indians that are represented or depicted. So why did they choose them to represent all Native communities in the United States? Was it because they were the group that was most stereotypical, or was it because they're the group that was most foreign to American society at the time? I don't really have an answer to these questions, but I just think it's interesting that Plains Indians were chosen to represent all Native communities. Why? So, as I looked at my classmates' reactions to Real Injun, I was very intrigued, and I was able to see new ideas as well. But something that really stood out to me was written by Gabrielle. She stated that more Native American representation in the media would be more beneficial, but that she doesn't think in order to be represented and feel like there's a breakthrough in a society that a movie needs to be made about your race. While I agree with her that more Native American representation would be beneficial, I respectfully disagree that they shouldn't have movies or other Hollywood productions about them or about any other marginalized race or group of people in America. I think it's very important to get movies, narratives, and other stories out about these races and groups of people that are so often marginalized and oppressed in our society. As a white woman, I see my race and my story, I guess, represented in Hollywood everywhere. However, Native American women, Black women, Asian women, women of all sorts of races don't get to see themselves represented in American media, and even if they do, it's very inaccurate sometimes. I think it's important to share their stories with the country to educate those with the privilege and with the power that was given to them because of their race being perceived as dominant. This can also tie back into my critique on misrepresentation. It's important to share different outlooks on topics than those in privilege to help understand how marginalized communities really feel. Misrepresentation covers the marginalized group of women, but it doesn't necessarily bring intersectionality into question like it should. And it makes me wonder that if it was made today instead of a couple years ago, would it be different? Would it bring women into color into question more, or would it bring women of the LGBTQIA plus community more? And I think that's something that needs to be discussed in society today as well. But going back to Real Injun, I was reminded of a feeling I had while watching the documentary as I read a comment from Ari. Ari mentions the Bugs Bunny part from the documentary, and how Bugs Bunny is singing about killing Native people. It's appalling to me that there are collections of Bugs Bunny that can still be bought and consumed by children today. My 3-year-old niece, one of her favorite things to watch when I'm watching her is her Bugs Bunny collection, and that terrifies me to see that Native people are represented as a stereotype and are just thrown away and killed off in a children's TV show. And it's not just Native people who are represented that way in Bugs Bunny, or in Bugs Bunny and Looney Tunes. I think that's the connection. I've also seen other racist remarks about Black people as well as other races in Looney Tunes and Bugs Bunny's cartoons. While Bugs Bunny may be seen as a cultural text from American society, that it's important to our culture because it was a very popular cartoon and it was something that people grew up with. I think it's important to see that what was said in those episodes is not okay today, and that these episodes shouldn't be able to be bought in collections anymore. And as Ari said, children are very impressionable, and the things depicted in Looney Tunes cartoons are very destructive and disrespectful to marginalized communities everywhere. And, we can't erase the history of Bugs Bunny and what happened, but we can prevent people from, being able to buy this disrespectful content in bulk like you can today. Another thing about Real Injun that I wanted to discuss was the inclusion of Clint Eastwood. And I understand that Eastwood was an actor in an age of misrepresentation of Native American culture, but Eastwood claimed that he thought depictions of Native people were unfair in Westerns and other Hollywood movies at the time. But he turned around and directed a 2008 film, Gran Torino, doing the same things to Hmong people. And he included actual Hmong actors, but the actor who plays the main character in Gran Torino has come out and said that he feels bad about being in the movie because of the way his community was represented. And it's ironic to me that Clint Eastwood went and said, oh yeah, it was inaccurate of the Native American people, it was unfair, the stereotypes weren't true. But he represented the Hmong people with stereotypes, much like the Native Americans were represented with since the beginning of the film industry. How is that any different? So, I think it's important to allow people of marginalized cultures to be involved in the major decisions when Hollywood portrayals are dealing with their cultures. We need truth and accuracy in this diverse age to educate those in privilege who don't see the diversity in their everyday lives. And I think it's important that their stories get shared when Hollywood portrayals are being made. Last week's materials obviously really got me to think. I was intrigued by my peers' responses, and I'm really eager to hear the rest of their opinions on different material throughout the course of the semester.